Mapping a battle zone isn't like any other kind of cartography. Positions must be precise and accurate, the objectives clear. Anything that isn't directly relevant to achieving the objective is a distraction and gets left out. Military historians love nothing more than to examine any map that was drawn up before the battle. It's like peering right into the minds of the strategist that drew it. Today's map is a wonderful example of just such a battle map. It's just that this battle wasn't the bloody kind, though it was just as critical to American history as Cowpens, Gettysburg, or San Juan Hill. Yes, the war was fought by stockbrokers and entrepreneurs instead of sailors and soldiers, but the stakes were no less for that, nor the strategy any less critical, or the map any less essential for success. The map is going to take us to 1848 and the undeclared war with Britain that would settle the question of America's economic independence. The real British Empire, after all, wasn't just the colonies where the redcoats marched. It was also every state whose resources were dedicated to feeding the British mills and fattening the British stockbrokers and banks. In 1848, America was still a long way from real independence, economic independence from that empire. The map is going to show us one of the battlefields in this undeclared war. It's an outstanding early example of truly modern cartography. Let's see what we can learn from it. Welcome to the Eye of History. We love old maps here. We see them as windows into the past. If you want to see history from a new and unique perspective, then please subscribe and join the adventure. First, let's meet our strategist, Richard Cowling Taylor. Born in Britain in 1789, died in Philadelphia, 1851. One of the multitude of talented immigrants who helped build America. He started as a surveyor. His first work of note was cataloging the ruins of British monasteries. In fact, he wrote the canonical reference on the topic and achieved some measure of acclaim in antiquarian circles. But that was just to earn money while he learned geology from the British godfather of geology, William Smith. After which, he found surveying mining properties to be much more profitable. He was 41 when he crossed the Atlantic. That was in 1830, and he was already at the top of his field. America would give him even more scope for his talents. His first job was surveying the path of a new railroad, the Tioga, and here he made his only really significant mistake. Unfamiliar as he was with the incredibly complex Allegheny strata, he discouraged the project. He did not believe that the path of the railroad would lead to any coal. 20 years later, he would be proven wrong, and the railroad would get built. Taylor performed many other surveys, and he became the definitive expert on the region's geology. You can find 2 of his reports online. 200 pages of detailed text and charts and tables. It's much more than just the volume, depth, and quality of the coal. No detail escapes him. He even gets into the dimensions of the canal boats. There was no question that he was the top man in the field, in the Western Hemisphere at least, if not the entire world. He went to Cuba to assess copper mines. He traveled to Panama to look at gold, and to Canada for asphaltum. Very useful stuff at the time. He also published dozens of scientific papers. His most important paper was titled, quote, "On the Carboniferous Series of the U.S. of North America as to the actual position of the Old Red Sandstone in America." That might sound a bit trivial, but it's actually one of the most important geological papers of the era. In it, he proves that the stratigraphy, that is, the way the bedrocks are layered in North America, is the same as in Europe. This was the final proof that the Earth was extremely old, and that the history of the Earth could be divided into eras and epochs marked by specific layers of rock. You know these eras. They have names like Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. Another example is the Carboniferous era, which is the era when the coal fields were laid down in places all around the world. The Old Red Sandstone mentioned in the title was one of these characteristic layers. It was formed in the period we call the Devonian, which just happens to be the era right before the Carboniferous, which means that if you find Old Red Sandstone, there's a very good chance that there will be some coal in the neighborhood. Now, before Taylor came along, geologists were only sure that this was the case in Europe. There was still some doubt as to whether this was a universal truth. Taylor's paper ended any doubt. There are some modern geologists who nitpick at Taylor's legacy. They point to the mistakes and omissions in his reports, but this looks pretty petty to me. The modern geologist gets to analyze seismological data with sophisticated software. He can date rocks by their radioactive properties and their chemistry through crystallography. The Appalachian strata are ridiculously complex, and Taylor did not have seismological tools, or radioactive dating, or crystallography. He didn't even have road cuts to expose the bedrock. I would happily wager that you could take the entire geology faculty from any university and give them the same time and tools that Taylor had, and they would not do one jot better. And I would further wager they would never match Taylor's greatest achievement. You might call this a strategy paper. I'll call it his battle plan. It's the book that this map came from. The Statistics of Coal, a 600-page opus describing the entirety of the coal trade almost worldwide. It covers everything. It starts with a bit of a motivational statement. Coal is to industry what oxygen is to the lungs, water to the plant, nourishment to the animal. And his message is clear. The future prosperity of every country depends on its access to coal. The book lays out the current strategic situation. Britain produces more coal than any nation, 8 times what America produces. And this has consequences. Even in 1848, just a little more than a decade before the Civil War, America has to import iron from England. In fact, America was England's biggest customer. Imagine if this were to continue. How would the Civil War have unfolded if the North was still dependent on imports of iron, munitions, and machinery from Britain, while the South was still dependent on exports of cotton to Britain? Do you think that Britain would have just sat on the sidelines? Let me know in the comments, especially if you are British. But Taylor also pointed out America has 12 times the coal deposits as Britain. America's economic independence, then, depended on America's ability to tap those resources, and to tap them with American capital, American machinery, and American industry. It's an incredible book. To say that it was well received would be an understatement. One review, quote, "We venture to say that on no kindred subject has a more complete or perfect treatise ever been produced." With the book, Taylor lays out the goals of the war, the composition of the forces, and the strategic objectives. And with this map, Taylor lays out the battle plan. The battle will hinge upon the ability to conquer the greatest coal deposit known in the world, the Great Allegheny Bituminous Coalfield. Let's dive into this map. The first thing we notice, north is not towards the top. Compare this to the map I talked about in this other video. That map was made by a British publisher for the common Brit. There's no particular focus. This map treats everything as of equal importance. It just happens to be a wonderful map for us because the precise moment the map was made. You'll have to watch this video to see why. The keys are hidden in the details. But today's map has a clear purpose. Taylor is showing us a battlefield, and the relative location of the North Pole is irrelevant. Instead, he arranges that the current position is at the bottom, and the objective is at the top, and the battle will proceed accordingly, from bottom to top. At the bottom are the cities and ports. And these are the primary markets. The cities used coal for household heating, for factories, boilers, steamboats, and engines, and above all, to stoke the furnaces which made the iron. Iron for ships. About half of all new ships built now were iron, not wood. Iron for rails. Iron for bridges and buildings. So consider these: New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington. These are where our Army is currently camped. Our Army being, of course, the entrepreneurs, the bankers, the engineers, and builders. And at the top is our objective. It could not be made plainer. We must advance to the top of the map, to the great Allegheny bituminous coalfield. There are some impediments. There are two main lines of mountains we see. The first line is a series of ranges: Schooley's Mountain, Conewago Hills, South Mountain. They are shown as one line, but they're actually several unrelated ranges of varied geology. What they have in common is that they're harder rock, resistant to erosion. These hills didn't so much build up as the area around them eroded away. Now, between the two lines is the Great Appalachian Valley, one of the most consequential features of the American landscape, though somehow it's been almost completely ignored by history. It is a 1,200-mile-long strip stretching from Quebec to Alabama. Here it's known as the Lehigh and Lebanon valleys, but it's also the Champlain and Hudson valleys, which were key routes during the Revolutionary War. Further south, it's the Cumberland and Shenandoah valleys. In the Civil War, this is where the most important battle of all was fought, Gettysburg. It's also the Tennessee Valley, the birthplace of the New Deal. A feature this weird and important deserves a proper explanation, but to be honest, I couldn't find a good video or website to recommend. Now, I admit I find this frustrating. Geologists don't seem to have any concern for the needs of us historians. The second line of mountains, the Blue Mountains, marks the edge of the main Appalachian system, and beyond them is this huge blank area. This is a no man's land, the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Taylor doesn't even try to map them. There are countless mountain folds. Here's a satellite view to give you an idea. Personally, I once drove a 37-foot motorhome through this area. I will tell you, it was slow and exhausting, muscling that rig through all the curves. Taylor's route of attack is shown by railroads and canals, up the Potomac, the Susquehanna, the Schuylkill, and the Lehigh. Taylor does not waste a bit of ink on anything that isn't essential. My British-made map fills this space with a jumble of tiny towns, some barely more than a few farmsteads, and every little creek and ridge. But Taylor's map shows only what's important to the objective. He includes certain elevations, which are key to canal building and also important for railroads. And he includes certain distances, and of course, any coal or iron deposit in the area. Everything needed to execute the battle plan with no extraneous distractions. We don't see this much in maps from this era. We take it for granted today. In fact, most maps today are made with a very particular purpose in mind. It's so easy to generate maps today. All the map data is sitting in GIS databases, and the software tools to make a custom map are off the shelf, easy to use. But in Taylor's time, it was unusual. Maps were a lot of work. Lithography was starting to make it a little easier. You no longer had to etch the map directly into the plate. But still, Taylor put a lot of hours into this map. That other map was printed in an atlas that might have had a print run in the tens of thousands. This map was printed in a book that might have had a print run of a couple thousand. You can see how what gets put into a map depends a lot on both the technology and the economics of the time. This map shows us how the mid-19th century was something of a hinge point. From here on, maps with a specific purpose become more and more prevalent. The war here was as important as the Civil War. It was a third war of independence, and this time, economic. Would America become economically independent? Sitting here today, it's easy to assume that America's dominant economic position was an inevitability. America is blessed with so many resources: coal, iron ore, abundant and excellent farmland. The geography is favorable, numerous good ports and navigable rivers. But much the same could be said for many other countries that became economic dependencies. sometimes even political dependencies, or even colonies. Russia had coal, iron ore, rivers, farmland. India had as much, and once was rich, too. At the same time that America was pushing forward, China regressed. It's hard to see exactly what America had that Brazil didn't. Australia, Canada. What prosperity they enjoy largely comes from selling their soil, one oil barrel, one coal bin at a time. They're both in very vulnerable positions. These other states largely lost their war, or gained victory much later. In this economic war, the Pennsylvania coalfields were just one battlefield. Another was the battle over who would spin and weave American cotton, and who would build the ships to carry these goods, and who would own the ships as well. America became the economic power it is today in large part because it won this war then. It not only developed its energy resources early, built mills and shipyards and banks and stock exchanges, it did so largely with American capital, American entrepreneurship, and American technology. Victory was not inevitable, and America was fortunate because it was won before the next Great War, the war between the states, got underway. The book that laid out so much of the battle plan, Taylor's Statistics of the Coal Trade, the book is an incredible treasure trove of historical information. If you want to learn history, this is the sort of thing to read. There is no substitute for a contemporaneous source like this. You get a perspective unspoiled by the knowledge of future events. It can be quite humbling when you realize how wrong your initial judgments can be when they're based entirely on what was written after the fact. And you also get a lot of details that otherwise get lost over time. Now, as a collectible, this map is compromised. The book itself, in good condition, can go for $500 or more, but the map is out of the mainstream of collecting, and it's hard to value. Geological maps are not terribly sought after. It's a little hard to understand. They are beautiful, they have interesting content, and often have considerable historical significance. I think mostly that they lack celebrity, the map makers are mostly anonymous, and age. We'll see how they're valued in another century or so. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of their kind, then hit that subscribe button and give us a like while you're at it. It really helps nerdy channels like this one.